Hi kids. Well, I've come to the second part of the second book of the Wind in Willows. First of all, I just want to say how proud we are of you all fasting, to find someone somewhere that could find the cure for this horrible disease that we have at the moment. But we are so proud. Really are proud of you. Well done. Okay, the next venture, the mole falls in. And as you know, they were travelling down the river with a beautiful picnic hamper in the boat. So as they were going down the river, I shall start. It was so beautiful, just drifting down the river with the river rushing by, when all of a sudden they came off the main part of the river and they went into a smaller part where the grass was coming down and there was somewhere where they could put their little boat for their picnic. When they arrived, all Molly could do was put up his forepaws and gasp, "Oh my, oh my, oh my." The rat brought the boat alongside the bank, made her fast, helped the still awkward mole safely across the shore, and swung out from the luncheon basket. The mole begged as a favour that he would be allowed to unpack it all by himself, and the rat was very pleased to indulge him, and to sprawl at full length on the grass and rest, while his excited little friend shook out the tablecloth, spread it, took out all the mysterious packets one by one, and arranged their contents in due order, still gasping, "Oh my, oh my," at each fresh revelation. When all was ready, the rat said, "Now pitch in, old fella," and the mole was indeed very glad to obey, for he had started his spring cleaning at the very early hours that morning, as you all know, and he was very hungry. He didn't stop for a bite, he never had any soup, he had nothing, and he had been through a very great deal since that distant time, which now seemed days ago, and it wasn't. "What are you looking at?" said the rat presently, when the edge of their hunger was somewhat dulled, and the mole's eyes were able to wander off the tablecloth. "I'm looking," said the mole, "at a streak of bubbles that I see travelling along the surface of the water. That is, a thing that strikes me as very funny." "Bubbles, ho ho," said the rat, chirped cheerfully in the inviting sort of way. A broad glistening muzzle showed itself above the edge of the bank, and the otter hauled himself out, shook the water off his coat. "Greedy beggars," he observed, making for the provider. "Why didn't you invite me, Ratty?" "This was a very impromptu affair," explained the rat. "By the way, my friend Mr. Mole." "Proud, I'm sure," said the otter, and two animals were friends forthwith. "Such a rumpus everywhere," continued the otter. "All the world seems out on the river today. I came up this backwater to try and get a moment's peace, and then stumbled on you two." "Well, at least, I beg your pardon, I don't mean, you know. There was a rustle behind them proceeding from a hedge wherein last year's leaves still clung thick, and a stripy head with high shoulders behind it appeared forthwith. "Come on, Badger," shouted Rat. The badger strolled forth a pace or two, and then grunted, company," and turned his back and disappeared from view. "That's just the sort of fellow he is," observed the disappointed rat. "Simply hates society. Now we shan't see any more of him today. Well, tell us, who's out on the river?" "Toad's out there, for one," replied the otter, "in his brand new wager boat, new togs, new everything." The two animals looked at each other and laughed. "Once it was nothing but sailing," said the rat. "Then he tired of that and took punting. Nothing would please him but to punt all day, every day. A nice mess he made of it. Last year it was houseboating, and we all had to go and stay with him in his houseboat and pretend we liked it. It was going to spend the rest of his life in a houseboat. It's all the same. Whatever he takes up he gets tired of, and starts on something fresh." "Such a good fellow too," remarked Otter reflectively. "No stability, especially in a boat." From where they sat, they could get a glimpse of the main stream across the island that separated them, and just then a wager boat flashed into view. The rower, a short, stout figure, splashing badly and rolling a good deal, but working his hardest. The rat stood up and hailed him, but Toad, for it was he, shook his head, settled sternly to his work. "He'll be out of the boat in a minute if he rolls like that," said the rat, sitting down again. "Of course he will," chuckled the otter. "Did I ever tell you the good story about Toad and the lock-keeper? It happened this way. Toad," an errant mayfly swerved unsteadily athwart the current in an intoxicating fashion, swerving by young bloods of mayflies, seeing life, a swirl of water, a kloop, and the mayfly was visible no more. Neither was the otter. The mole looked down. The voice was still in his ears, but the turf whereon he had sprawled was clearly vacant, not an otter to be seen as far as the distant horizon. But again there was the streak of bubbles on the surface of the river. The rat hummed a tune, and the mole recollected the animal's etiquette, forbade any sort of comment on the sudden disappearance of one's friend at any moment, for any reason, or for no reason whatsoever. "Well, well," said the rat, "I suppose we ought to be moving. I wonder which one of us had better pack the luncheon basket." He did not speak as if he was frightfully eager for the treat. "Oh, please, me," said the mole. So, of course, the rat let him. Packing the basket was not quite such pleasant work as unpacking the basket. He never is. But the mole was bent on enjoying everything. And although, just when he had got the basket packed, strapped up tightly, he saw a plate staring up at him from the grass. And when the job had been done again, the rat pointed out a fork, which anybody ought to have seen. But at last, behold, the mustard pot, which he had been sitting on without knowing it. Still, somehow the thing got finished at last, without much loss of a temper. The afternoon sun was getting low as the rat sculled gently homeward in a dreamy mood, murmuring poetry and things over to himself, and not paying much attention to Mole. But the mole was very full of lunch and self-satisfaction and pride, and already quite at home in the boat, so he thought. He was getting a bit restless, besides, and presently he said, "Ratty, please, I want to row now." The rat shook his head with a smile. "Not yet, my young friend," he said. "Wait till you've had a few lessons. It's not so easy as it looks." But the mole was quiet for a minute or two. He began to feel more and more jealous of the rat, sculling so strongly and easily along. The pride began to whisper that he could do it every bit as well. All of a sudden he jumped up, seized the oars so suddenly that Rat, who was gazing over the water saying more poetry things to himself, was taken by surprise, fell backward over the seat with his legs sticking up in the air. The mole took his place, grabbed the oars with entire confidence. "Stop it, you silly ass," cried the rat from the bottom of the boat. "You can't do it. You'll have us over." The mole flung his oars back with a flourish and made a great dig at the water. He missed the surface altogether, his legs flew up above his head, and he found himself lying on top of the prostrate rat, greatly alarmed. He made a grab at the side of the boat, and the next moment, splosh! Over went the boat, and he found himself struggling in the river. Oh my, how cold the water was, and oh, how very wet it felt. How it sang in his ears as he went down, 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 and bright welcome the sun looked as he rose to the surface, coughing and spluttering. How black was his despair when he felt himself sinking again. Then a firm paw grabbed at him by the scruff of his neck. It was the rat, and it was evidently laughing. The mole could feel himself laughing right down his arm and through his paw, and so into the mole's neck. If you can see, there's the picture of the mole and the rat in the water. because moles can't swim. The rat got hold of the oar and shoved it under Mole's arm. Then he did the same with the other side of him. Swimming aside, propelled the helpless animal to the shore and pulled him out and set him down on the bank. Squashy, pulpy lump of misery. When the rat had rubbed him down a bit and wrung out some of his wet from his fur, he said, "Now then, old fella, trot up and down the towing path as hard as you can till you're warm and dry again, while I dive for the luncheon basket." So the dismal mole, wet and ashamed, trotted backwards and forwards trying to get dry, while the rat plunged into the water again, recovering the boat, putting her right and making her fast, and then picking up the big old luncheon basket. When all was ready for a start once more, the mole, limp and dejected, took his seat in the stern of the boat. And as they set off, he said in a low voice, broken with emotion, "Ratty, my generous friend, I am very sorry indeed for my foolish and ungrateful conduct. My heart quite fails me when I think how I might have lost that beautiful luncheon basket. Indeed, I've been a complete ass, I know. Will you overlook it this once and forgive me and let things go on as before?" "That's all right, bless you," responded the rat cheerily. "What's a little wet to water, rat? I'm more in the water than out of it most days. Don't you think any more about it. And look here, I really think you had better come and stop with me for a time. It's very plain and rough, you know. Not like Toad's house at all, but you haven't seen that yet. Still, I can make you comfortable, and I'll teach you to row and to swim, and you'll soon be handy on the water as any of us." The mole was so touched by his kindness and speaking that he couldn't find words to answer, and he had to brush away a tear or two from the back of his paw. But the rat looked in another direction, and presently the mole spirit revived again, and he was able to give some straight back talk to a couple of more hens who were sniggering to each other about his bedraggled appearance. When they got home, the rat made a bright fire in the parlour and planted the mole in an armchair in front of it, having fetched down a dressing gown and slippers for him, and told him river stories till supper time. Very thrilling stories they were too, to an earth-dwelling animal like Mole, stories about weirs, sudden floods, leaping pike, streamers that flung hard bottles, at least bottles were certainly flung, and from the steamers, so presumably by them, and about herons and how particular they were, whom they spoke to, and about adventures down drains, night fishing with otter, or excursions far afield with badger. Supper was most cheerful meal, but very shortly afterwards a terribly sleepy mole had to be escorted upstairs by his considerable host to the best bedroom, where he soon laid his head on his pillow in great peace and contentment, knowing that his new-found friend, the river, was lapping the sill around his windowsill. The day was the only first of many similar ones for this very, very tired mole, each of them longer and full of interest at the ripening summer coming. He learnt to swim, to row, and into a joy of running. Water was around his ears. To the reed sterns he caught at intervals something of what the wind went whispering to so constantly among them. And he went to sleep. Good night.